2. Crazy Paving Man. King's Cross, Central Line. Bernice decided that the doctor had a cavalier attitude to first steps. In her experience, the first step into a new environment could kill you faster than a bad-tempered Dalek. You were supposed to be cautious. The Explorer's Manual had a checklist. Check the atmosphere. Check for bugs, animals, subsidence, solar radiation. Check that the goddamn landing ramp had extended properly. It went on for 15 pages. Not the doctor, though, Bernice thought. A quick look round with the TARDIS scanner, he puts on his hat, opens the door, and out he goes. It was the doctor's assumption of invulnerability that worried Bernice. She hoped it applied to her as well. When she followed him out of the door, it was with the guilty assumption that anything nasty would have to go through him first. And that was her first mistake. STS Central, Olympus Mons. The security feeds went down in a blaze of static. "What the hell was that?" yelled Ming. She switched a monitor over to English 37 and the bad news show. Yak Harris caught between slots, frozen solid with his mouth open. There was a sudden pixel flicker, and Yak's suit changed colour. I'll be damned, thought Ming. He really is a computer program. "Well," said Yak Hams, jerking into life. "Well, we seem to be having some technical problems from the Arcturus terminus." You and me both, thought Ming. Up on the status boards, a silver line pierced into the station's heart. "Give me an opstat on the stellar tunnel." "It's down," said a controller. "Down?" "Just the carrier wave." "Can't be down." Ming checked the status board again. "We pumped 22 gigawatts into the bloody thing. Enough to fry a small town. Any contact with the terminal?" "Nope." "Why not?" "Breakdown at the terminal end." "Hardware or software?" "Your guess is as good as mine." "Get maintenance for me," said Ming. "And the KGB." The master console in her office chimed for her attention. Threat analysis catching up with the real world displaying an options panel on the screen. The computer wanted Ming to choose between a technical malfunction or external threat. She glared at the screen. Not yet, she thought. Not until I know what's going on. A time code at the top of the screen counted down from 30 minutes. When it reached 0, the computer would make up its own mind. Ming wanted to know what moron had thought of that. It was 3 minutes since the stunnel was supposed to have opened, 4 minutes since they lost contact with Arcturus Terminal. Ming's instincts were to boot the problem upstairs, but the senior management had all been attending the opening ceremony. She was on her own. She tore the corner of her last packet of Zap and dumped one in a cup full of dead coffee. It started to fizz. She ordered the controllers to isolate the terminal and start pulling the trains out of the depots and whack them back into the tunnels. The president was at the opening ceremony too, which meant she should have heard from the security services by now, from Event Horizon at the very least. On the media feed, Yak Harris was talking to a panel of experts. A good sign that the media didn't know what had happened either. Ming wondered whether the pundits were computer-generated as well. The stop. The air was the colour of dust, and there was no memory of a warning, no precognition, no transition, just a sudden birth into this confusion of falling stone. Instinct and training dragged her forward towards a rectangular patch of light ahead. Left hand clamped over her mouth, shallow breathing through her fingers, forcing herself to stay upright. Smoke rises, but dust falls. She had a sense of a heavy mass shifting above her, and she stumbled faster. Shadows crashed down behind her, shock waves billowed through the dust, streaming around her and into the light. For an instant she saw the figure of a woman framed in the rectangle ahead, an image of herself, hunched and stumbling. No warning, like an orbital strike, like a missile in terminal phase, sprinting ahead of its sound wave. Not even a whisper before it hits and strips the houses down to their bare bones. From in front, she thought, as she met the impossible shadow face to face. The light is coming from the front. Then she knew, even before the dust veil lifted to reveal the face. "Mother!" she wailed, hands groping forward, grasping and meeting nothing. Dust filled her throat and eyes, stopping up the tears. Left her blindly struggling forward. "Mother!" she tried to call out, but the dust choked off the sound. Blindly she fought to get further, but it felt as if the dust was piling up around her, drifts creeping up her thighs and back. Her mind became filled with the heavy thud of her heartbeat, her chest filling up with an awful vacuum, as if some membrane had torn as she fell forward into space and clear air. Terminal phase. The final fall to ground zero. Impact. Stale air blew out of her lungs, saliva and dust spewing upwards in an arc. A stripe of numbness crashed down her side and arm. She heard her bones breaking, and in that moment she remembered her name. King's Cross, Central Line. Kadiatu remembered another rescue like this, thrashing useless limbs, swallowing water, watching the sunlight recede as she sank down into the stream. Under the water, her friends' voices became shrill and distant. When she bashed her head against the side of the boat, it was like a wooden gong, a deep profundo boom, which intermingled with the pain until she couldn't tell them apart. Her father saved her that time, yanked her from the river by the hair, his big fist knotted in her braids. "That's why your mother plaits your hair," he told her later, "to give me something to grab hold of." Something had come through the station. Something that howled out of the tunnel and filled the wind with knives and the stink of ozone. The inspector had been lifted from his feet and hung shaking before her. There was a sharp crack as his visor shattered, and Kadiatu glimpsed a pale, contorted face. Then he vanished in an expanding cloud of blue vapour that was in turn shredded by the wind and blown away. That was when somebody grabbed Kadiatu's hair and pulled her to safety. Except she wasn't a child anymore, wasn't drowning in the washing stream on a bright McKenney morning to the shrill screams of her friends. It was not her father's hand that was knotted in her hair, yanking her up and away from the platform edge. Whoever it was, they were strong, lifting her easily to her feet as if she still were that child, and not the 72 kilos of bone and muscle she had become. "Not again," said a voice by her ear. Arcturus Terminal, Stunnel Terminus. Old Sam was moving, really moving, way beyond the normal human range. As they moved up on the Galeria, he was almost too fast for the eye to catch. "Jesus, Sam," hissed Dogface, "slow down, will you?" Old Sam came to a sudden halt by the entrance and stood rock still. "Slow enough?" There was a manic edge to his voice. "Are you wired?" asked Lambada. "Just some Doberman," said Old Sam. Blondie heard Lambada swearing under her breath. Ahead, Galeria was in darkness, the entrance a pitch-black rectangle. Blondie didn't think it was a good place for Old Sam, not with him cranked up on Doberman. "Don't worry," said Old Sam. It's good stuff." "It's not the bloody quality I'm worried about," said Lambada. "Where's it from?" "I scored it off Blondie's girlfriend." Old Sam grinned at Blondie. "Didn't I?" They all turned to stare at Blondie, who blushed. "Never mind that," said Dogface to Old Sam. "How are you feeling?" "Fast and mean," said Old Sam. "You can go first, then," said Lambada. "Okay," said Old Sam, and vanished into the darkness. Lambada glared at Blondie. "How was I supposed to know?" said Blondie. "He'll be all right," said Dogface. "It's not him I'm worried about," said Lambada. "It's us. What if he has a flashback?" "I haven't had a flashback in 10 years," said old Sam from just behind them. Lambada jerked round and grabbed Sam by his lapels. "Don't do that!" "Sorry," said old Sam, and Lambada let go. "Well?" asked Dogface. "The Galeria's clear of targets," reported old Sam. "I haven't been into the station yet." "No people?" asked Lambada. "That's what I said," said old Sam. "You said targets." "People targets," old Sam shrugged. "What's the difference?" Dogface linked with Credit Card back at the Olympus West and told him to put on the emergency lights. "Up in 30 seconds, said Credit Card. Ming broke into the link. "Well?" "We're going in as soon as the lights are on," said Dogface. "Any word from the KGB?" "Nothing from them or Viking security. Lights are up," said Credit Card. "Call you back, Ming," said Dogface. Old Sam led them across the empty Galeria. Dogface and Blondie in the middle, with Lambada bringing up the rear. Dogface kept his fingers in contact with the portable link box. "What's that smell?" asked Lambada. It came from the quick curry franchise. A 10-litre pot of curried goat was beginning to burn. Lambada turned off the stove. "No one here." Dogface stuck his finger into the pot and tasted it. "Maybe they didn't like the goat." "Come off it," said Lambada. "Everyone loves goat." "Goat flavouring," said Dogface. "Whatever," said Lambada. "Did you check the concourse?" Dogface asked old Sam. "Nothing." "Credit Card?" said Dogface. "Yo! Tell Ming we're going in now." King's Cross, Central Line. "Where does that tunnel go?" said the voice at Kadiatu's ear. "Let go," said Kadiatu, and the fingers relaxed their grip on her hair. In her mind, Kadiatu had constructed a huge man with oiled biceps, capable of lifting her one-handed. But when she turned, his hat was level with her shoulders. "Who are you?" The man ignored her and gazed down to the far end of the station and the tunnel gateway. The tip of his red-handled umbrella tapped insistently on the platform. "That tunnel," he said. "Where does it go?" Blue paint was splattered in a long, irregular line down the length of the platform. Kadiatu squatted down and reached out a hand to touch it. Her hand was trembling. "Don't," said the man. The paint was wet and sticky, roughened by the thin layer of grit that covered the formed concrete of the platform. She picked up a small lump between her thumb and forefinger. It felt like a hardened composite. The edges had run like wax. It was a chunk of the inspector's body armour. Kadiatu stood up fast, the lump falling from her hand onto the trackway below to sizzle for a moment on the friction field. Her shoulders jerked backwards, as if trying to distance her body from the stain on her fingers. Bile clawed its way up her throat as her body began to shake itself to pieces. The slap was hard enough to snap her head sideways. "Better?" asked the man. Kadiatu nodded. Her cheek was stinging. There was a hint of blood in her mouth. "Who are you?" "I'm the doctor," said the man. He was shorter than her, but Kadiatu felt that he looked down on her from a greater height. In the flat station lights, she couldn't tell what colour his eyes were. "Doctor of what?" "Everything," said the doctor. She could see his eyes now. They were a vivid, angry brown. They seemed to track across her face, as palpable as raster scan. "What are you staring at?" "Nothing," said the doctor. "Where does that tunnel lead?" "Eventually?" "That'll do for a start." "Pluto." "How do I get there?" "Wait for the next train," said Kadiatu. The doctor looked back at the tunnel gateway. "Next time, I'm going to find a better place to park." "What?" "Well," said the doctor, "I've kept you long enough. I'm sure you'll have things to do, people to see." He pulled out a gold watch on a fob chain and checked the time. He glanced idly down the platform again before looking down to examine his shoes. The umbrella restarted its tattoo on the grimy concrete. "Why are you still here?" he said after a moment. "I'm waiting for the train," said Kadiatu. She risked a glance sideways at the doctor. He was scowling at the wall opposite. He nodded in an abstracted fashion. "You saved my life," thought Kadiatu, "and now you're pretending I don't exist." "Sorry," said the doctor without looking round. "It was an accident." "What do you mean, an accident?" "It's a reflex of mine," said the doctor. "I see someone in danger, and I try to save them. I can't help myself." Kadiatu nodded at the blue splatter along the platform. "What about him?" For an instant, a spasm of real pain crossed the doctor's face. "You were closer," he said. "When's the next train?" Kadiatu glanced at the indicator hollow. It said, "Check destination on front of train." Not a good sign. "Don't hold your breath," she told him. "I'll try not to." "I need a drink," said Kadiatu suddenly. "How about you?" Arcturus Terminal, Stunnel Terminus. The station had been swept clean of people. Blondie's shoes stuck with every step in the sticky blue stuff that covered the floor and splattered the walls. The Stunnel gateway was a spinning copper gong nailed to the far wall. Dogface had his arm around old Sam's shoulders. The veteran was shaking badly. There was a weasel madness in his slotted eyes. Dogface was talking low and fast, trying to get old Sam off whichever memory shore he'd beached on. Lambada was assembling an industrial caliber hypo, her face fixed into a concentrated grin as she clipped it together. When the device was complete, she walked up behind old Sam, placed his blunt head against his thigh, and squeezed the trigger. The hiss went on for a long time, and when it finished, old Sam toppled over with a look of intense happiness fixed on his face. "Doberman," said Lambada disgustedly. Blondie found something protruding from the blue. "What's this?" Lambada had a look. Portable comms link. "Did someone drop it?" Lambada and Dogface exchanged worried looks. "Blondie," said Lambada, "it's an internal unit. It's implanted and runs parallel to the spinal column. Under the skin." "What is this stuff?" asked Dogface. "I don't know," said Lambada. "Look at the splatter patterns. They all radiated from the gateway. As if something came through and—" Lambada made a sweeping motion with her hands. "They ended up looking into the entrance gateway to the central line extension." "Yeah," said Dogface. "But why blue?" "I don't know." "I don't get it," said Blondie. "Where is everyone? Where's the president?" "I think we're standing in them," said Dogface. Translonian. The Worthing-Le Havre branch was operating close to normal, so Kadiatu and the doctor rode the train to Caen and changed onto the Fracaise-Sardegna feeder. People were riding the long blue commuter trains, and Kadiatu began to feel normal again. The doctor was quiet all the way to Porto Torres, which at least gave her a good 10 minutes thinking time. Not that she thought of anything much. "Where are we now?" asked the doctor. "Sardinia." "Really?" "Yes." "How extraordinary," said the doctor. "Where are we going now?" "We're going to ride the connection." The Translonian should have been a feeder route. Shiny blue trains should have shuttled commuters from the sea cities of the Ionian Sea, but the floating cities were never built. Just the anchor points and the transit stations underneath. Now it was good for nothing, except a slow crawl to Athenae. Whatever had swept through King's Cross wasn't going to travel this line. Only dealers and punters rode the connection. An ancient Korean single-carriage train was waiting with its doors open. Green paint peeled off the superstructure. Its windows were opaque with dirt. The inside smelt strongly of sweat and urine. Kadiatu warned the doctor not to sit down. At the rear of the compartment, a filthy bundle of rags unfolded, and yellow eyes glared at them from under a leather slouch hat. "Who's that?" asked the doctor. "That's the conductor." The conductor grunted in their direction before shambling over to the open doorway. When he leaned out, Kadiatu caught a glimpse of gunmetal blue slung beneath his jacket. "Any more for any more," shouted the conductor. Satisfied that no one else was boarding, the conductor collapsed back into his seat. The doors closed with a wheeze of aging hydraulics, and the train lurched off towards the gateway. There was a jolt as the carriage penetrated the interface. Shafts of light strobed through the imperfect shielding. The seats were too sticky to sit on, so Kadiatu and the doctor hung onto the straps against the train's erratic motion. "First stop," called the conductor from the back. "Women's clothing, lingerie, pharmaceuticals." The train slowed as it entered the first station, but it didn't stop. Instead, the doors cranked open on override as they coasted slowly through. On the platform, crowds of people milled around stalls and bundles of merchandise. The smell of cheap perfume wafted inside the carriage. A woman jumped nimbly on board near the front of the carriage, and somebody on the platform started throwing bundles of cloth which she caught. By the end of the station, she had a small pile stacked on the seats beside her. There was another jolt, the doors closed, and they were in the tunnel again. The woman looked over at Kadiatu and the doctor, but didn't say anything. That was the cardinal rule of the connection. No business on the train. "Second stop," called the conductor. "Sporting goods and leisure wear." Again the train coasted through a station with its doors jammed open. This time 2 Vricks jumped on, a boy and a girl, high-caste Brahmin types with short black hair and grey eyes. The girl stacked her long board along the seats. The boy kept hold of his beatbox, hefting it like a weapon. "Who are they?" asked the doctor. "Free surfers," said Kadiatu. The doctor must really be out-system not to know that. "What's the matter?" she called to the Vricks. "Cracked board, or has the music stopped working?" The girl snarled at Kadiatu, who kissed her teeth in return. "Manners," said the doctor to no one in particular. The Vricks grabbed their straps as the train lurched off into the next tunnel. The Vricks had wild eyes from too much unshielded transit, the rich kid's lifestyle, live fast and die flat against an oncoming train. "Third stop," called the conductor. "Catamites, courtesans, and computer processing." "Time to get off," Kadiatu told the doctor as the doors opened. With a brief wave at the Vricks, she jumped from the carriage. She came down harder than she meant and stumbled. Behind her, the doctor landed on the platform like a cat. There were no stools set up on the station platform. Instead, flickering holograms above the exits pulled at the eye. Looking at them made Kadiatu feel hot and bothered. Probably packed with subliminals, thought Kadiatu, and glanced back to see how the doctor was doing. He'd stopped to look at one of the holograms. It showed a woman in abbreviated Ice Warrior armour, chained against a wall of folded neon. The thrust of her hips promised aggression and imminent violation. Ice Maiden's famous logo, the iconography of the 1,000 Days' War. The doctor's face was intent as he examined the hologram, not aroused, merely curious, as if the writhing figure was an anthropological exhibit. "What about love?" said the doctor. "What about love? Love was a black rose and a missing money pen, a rip-off waiting for you to drop your guard." "Sex and death are pretty close, I guess," said Kadiatu. "Only in humans." Ice Maiden's entrance was through the far exit and up a ramp. At the door, a joy boy in leather skin tights stood in their way. "Buying or selling?" he asked. "What do you think?" The joy boy nodded at the doctor. "What about Daddy?" "Who knows?" said Kadiatu, and walked past. The original Ice Maiden had been an R&R stop in Jacksonville, halfway up Olympus Mons. A good place for the grunts to chill out after their duty tours in the chaotic terrain and shrieking winds of the Valles Marineris. And Francine, who had done 2.5 tours with the 31st, had recreated it under the ocean, right down to the puff concrete walls and rusty blast doors. "Interesting place for a drink," said the doctor. "Not here," said Kadiatu. "Drinks later? Business first." Behind the bar was a big woman, almost as tall as Kadiatu, and dressed in the same stylized Ice Warrior gear as the Joy Boy outside. "Tasteless," said the doctor. "Where's Francine?" Kadiatu asked the woman. "Who wants to know?" "A friend of the family." "I didn't know that Francine had a family." "That's why you're working the bar," said Kadiatu, "and I'm asking the questions." The antechamber round the back had a gun hanging from the ceiling like a chandelier. It was an electric autogun, a cluster of rotating barrels suspended on a gimbaled stanchion. An unnecessary mass of pressure leads at the top hissed as the gun tracked Kadiatu and the doctor around the room. Francine could have installed hidden lasers into the light fittings, but she wanted her visitors to know that they were under her sights. The gun was a fashion statement. A door opened in the far wall. Kadiatu told the doctor to stay where he was and went in. Francine was lying with her eyes closed on a divan in the centre of the room. "Hello, Auntie," said Kadiatu. The mobile half of Francine's face formed into a smile. "Kadiatu," she said, "you got big." Kadiatu knelt down by the divan and put her arms around the old woman. Francine caught hold of her braids and playfully shook her head. "I suppose it was bound to happen." Her hand traced the contours of Kadiatu's face. "Still got your daddy's nose, though." The angel Francine, falling from orbit with the thin Martian air streaming across her wings. Terminal dives into the twisting canyons of the Noctis Labyrinthus with a belly full of tactical nukes. Knitted into the cockpit, her mind blitzed on Doberman and Heinkel. The air turbulence lit up like neon, doing the missions too dumb for the smart weapons. Lost it in the east over the Ganges Chasma, shaking apart in the grip of a pop-up cannon, one of those little oversights by military intelligence. Francine fighting all the way down to the dunes, the violet sky whirling around her, dying amidst her broken wings of carbon fibre. It was Kadiatu's father that pulled her out, holding the LZ clear for a swift medevac back to the world. Riding up on the running board, so the story went, bagging greenies all the way. Francine opened white marble eyes and looked at Kadiatu. "Who's the man?" Rumour said that Francine's eyes were coded into the high ultraviolet and low infrared, nothing in the visible spectrum at all. Kadiatu wondered what it was like living in the world of the invisible. "Calls himself the Doctor," said Kadiatu. "He the problem?" "No." "Money trouble." Kadiatu told Francine about the deal with Max, about the money pen gone missing in a park outside the Forbidden City. "You want this blondie bagged?" asked Francine. Kadiatu hoped she was joking and said no, she'd take care of that herself. Francine offered some walking around money and promised to put a trace on the money pen. As Kadiatu was leaving, Francine said one more thing. "You might ask your friend what he needs 2 hearts for." The stop. "I'm not going to do that again," thought Benny. "Whatever it was that I did." She was unwilling to move her head just yet. Above her, a shaft 3 meters across vanished upwards into the gloom. It was lit by a single strip of xenon lighting that tinted the walls the colour of ancient gunmetal. Halfway up, the xenon strip was broken by a rectangular shadow. Facing it on the other side of the shaft was an identical door-shaped hole. Even from where she was lying, Benny could see that the edges of both holes were razor clean, the kind of cut a force field makes. They were 2, maybe 2.5 meters tall, about 1 meter wide, and at least 20 meters up the shaft. It was a long way to fall. The fall like that would break your back, grind your vertebrae flat, shatter ribs. The absence of pain scared her. It indicated such a massive trauma as to put the whole body into shock. Better to breathe shallow and wait for help. Waiting for help, like the shelter, packed in with the stink of vomit, urine and fear. The small children screaming in terror as the lights went out. Benny pressed up against the porthole. The silhouette of her mother burnt onto her retina, bright rainbow flashes as the radiation conflicted with the shelter's preservation field. An adult voice behind her called out the survivor statistics on the deep transmitter. "Shallow breathing exercise, children," said teacher from somewhere near the back. "Help's coming." Benny moved. She didn't believe in teacher no more. There was no pain as she got up, but when she ran a hand down her side to check for broken ribs, her skin felt dry and cracked. She picked at a flap just above her hip, and a long strip peeled away, an oily purple under the xenon lights. Not her skin, then, but something that she had been coated in, perhaps during the cave-in. Her coverall was missing its sleeves and most of the back. What was left was glued to her skin. Benny looked up the shaft at the rectangular hole above and tried to remember which antique tribe used to paint themselves blue. She realised that she was standing in an inverted T-junction, horizontal shafts leading off to the left and right, the same concrete walls, inset conduits and xenon strips as the shaft above her. Concrete walls, she thought. Not a station, then. A planet or an asteroid base. The shafts had the look of service tunnels, lighting strips with hard edges, not the diffusion unit she was used to. An old-fashioned style. Someone had mentioned time travel, but how far back? She remembered a series of boxes within boxes, infinity nesting within the finite, a control room that seemed almost a parody of technology, a figure standing at a console. It, too, was transdimensional, something monstrous crammed down into a parody of human flesh. The light came down on her from above, brilliant and ecstatic. The weight of it pressed her down onto her knees. Benny felt as if the light shone right through her like an X-ray laser, heating up her insides and making silhouettes of her bones. And all the children were there, from the shelter and the long dorm at the academy, faces as yellowed as the ancient porcelain of the doll that was centrepiece of the trophy cabinet. All those fit young bodies running into the forest, clean limbs and bright eyes waiting for her, waiting for the airburst and the butcher's knife. Again, Benny came out, still standing beneath the shaft, the cold still making the floor vibrate beneath her feet. She felt awfully alone, a deep mammalian need for human contact, for warm skin and the sweet wash of pheromones. Homesick for night-time in the long dawn with the murmur of sleeping children. Maybe time travel fucks with your mind, thought Benny. Piraeus. Rain fell on the pitted tarmac of the Acti Meowalis. It rattled off the rusting steel of the ferries that listed in the grey water of the harbour. A party of archaeologists ran past the taverna, holding sheets of newsfax above their heads to keep the rain off. Kadiatu watched them splashing through the puddles towards the derelict customs house. "We were talking," said the doctor, "about the meaning of life." He pushed a square of feta cheese around his plate. They were sitting out on the taverna's veranda, which gave them an unequalled view of the crumbling docks. Rain drummed on the thatched roof overhead. "We were," said Kadiatu. "Are you sure?" The doctor poured the remains of their second bottle of ouzo into his glass. "Of course I'm sure. I'm always sure." He looked around the table. "At least, I'm sure that we need another bottle." Kadiatu ordered another bottle of ouzo. "Do you believe in fate?" asked the doctor. "No," said Kadiatu. "Predestination?" "Only in game shows." The landlord's daughter arrived with the ouzo and thumped it down on the table. Kadiatu managed to grab it before the doctor and poured herself a drink. "So why are you here?" asked the doctor. Kadiatu held up her glass. to get drunk. Why here? Cheapest bar I know. Why am I here then? Asked the doctor. I thought you wanted a drink. The doctor finished his glass and poured some more. I never drink, he said. I'm famous for my not drinking. How many bottles so far? This is the 4th, said the doctor. The doctor was silent for a while, intent on the bottom of his glass. Behind them, from the taverna proper, came the sound of dominoes clicking on starched linen. Kadiatu could feel the drink slowly unknotting her stomach. Across the harbour, the dirty white apartment blocks clambered through the rain and up the hills to Athens. So why are you here? Asked Kadiatu. I'm celebrating, said the doctor without looking up. What are you celebrating? A birthday. Yours? Not exactly. Whose then? Kadiatu saw his eyes again as he looked into her face. The universe, he said. Kadiatu snorted. You don't think the universe has a birthday, do you? Said the doctor. There was an angry edge to his voice. Well, it does. In exactly 10 minutes, the universe will be 13,500,000,020,012 years old. Maybe we should get it a cake. No, said the doctor. That wouldn't be a good idea. Why not? You'd never fit all the candles on. The doctor poured them both another drink. You'd think, he said, that it would be old enough to look after itself. I always thought it did. You wish. Kadiatu watched through her drink as the doctor drained his glass. Why do you have 2 hearts? Why do you have 2 hearts? Because I'm the anomaly, the spanner in the works, the fly in the ointment, the cheese grater in the goldfish bowl. I know what you are, said Kadiatu. The doctor smiled at her and tilted his chair back until it balanced on 2 legs. Do you, he said, really? You're the butterfly wing. I'm nothing of the sort, said the doctor, rocking back and forth. I'm just an old man getting drunk. You're not drunk, said Kadiatu. You're not capable of anything as simple as getting drunk. No? You're just behaving in the manner of someone getting drunk. In that case, said the doctor, why am I about to pass out? The doctor vanished from sight. There was a crash as the chair hit the tiled floor. Kadiatu carefully stood up and looked over the table. The doctor was lying on his back, still in the chair. His eyes were closed. He was singing softly to himself, his slurred voice curling upwards like cigarette smoke. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Nowhere. Although she knew it to be a lie, the memories Bernice had of her father were always tinged with the golden light of late evening. He smelt of the cologne her mother would synthesize in the kitchen, smiling to herself as she tapped out the pewter code. A secret smile, with one corner of her mouth higher than the other. The cologne would go into the engraved pewter bottle that had once belonged to her grandmother. When her father went away into space, her mother would fold the bottle carefully into his clothes as she slipped them in his vacuum-resistant carryall. When he left, he let Beamy walk with him as far as the transmat, his big, gentle hand holding hers as they walked through the sculpture park that fringed the married officers' quarters. She had wanted him to take her to the play area with its twisted swing and cushioned grass, but he said he couldn't. When he came back then, she demanded. Yes, he said, when he came back. He waved goodbye to Bernice from the transmat staging platform, the last golden light of the evening lighting up his face, gleaming off his polished silver cap badge. It was the last time she saw him. Bernice ran home to her mother, whose face had become suddenly grey and pinched. "Lay down your troubles." The last dying light changing the silver into gold. "Lay down your troubles, and let me fill you up with certainty." "Yes," said Benny. "Certainty." The stop. Zemina bought herself a bag of cola nuts at Tbilisi Central before grabbing the Charkov-Warazawa London feeder train. She chewed through 2, waiting for her Central Line connection at King's Cross. The bitter nuts helped keep her awake and take the semen taste out of her mouth. She waited incognito amongst the commuter crowd, a shapeless tan folding coat over her working clothes, daydreaming that she too was travelling back to some arcology on the plains of Elysium instead of outsystem to the stop. Everyone groaned loudly when the hologram said, "Unavoidable delay." All of them made suddenly equal by the vagaries of public transport. She finished the nuts as the train pulled out of Oberon and spent the last leg of the journey carefully folding the brown paper bag into smaller and smaller squares. Zemina always kept her bags, saving them until she had a kilo or so to flog down at Big Market. They were out of the commuter belt now, and the carriage was half empty and filled with a grim silence. When the train slid into Lowell, an old voice box always said, "This train terminates here." Terminate was the word. People seemed to pull themselves out onto the platform, reluctantly admitting that this was where they were well and truly terminating. Roberta was there, propping up the wall by the pawnbroker concession in the ticket office. A half-naked cat food monster was heaped in a fetal position on the concrete beside her, a line of spittle drooling from a slack mouth. Roberta was idly poking the monster in the back with the toe of her boot, considering whether to roll him or not. Sometimes even the derelict had something worth stealing. Roberta wasn't happy about waiting all this time for Zemina, but 2 were better than 1 walking the stop. There were more cat food monsters on Main Street, clumps of them at regular intervals down the sidewalk. "Got any scrip?" they mumbled as Roberta and Zemina walked past. "Fuck off," said Roberta to each of them in turn. A detox crew in grubby whites was zipping up a body bag on the corner of Main and Percy. Yellow tape was strung out around the crime scene, while a battered forensic scanner bobbed uncertainly over the area. A couple of housing authority cops kept a wary eye on the gawkers, target visors restlessly scanning the blank white faces of the crowd. A detective with a bone-weary stance and a scraped-off Maasai haircut watched over the drone as it sniffed the ground. "Oot's dead," said Roberta as they crossed the road to avoid the cops. "Happened back of the depot. Some kind of structural collapse. Really weird." The back end of the depot was Dixie territory. Oot was straight-up Afrikaans. "What was she doing out of area?" said Zemina. "You know," said Roberta, "nothing legal." At least half the skylights were out on Williamsburg Avenue, creating an evil twilight in the lead-up to the projects. Roberta didn't say much as they turned down the walkway to Block 56, keeping a wary eye on the shadows. Blocks 20 to 94 were solid Afrikaans, and de Brodeband generally kept the streets clear of any action they weren't running themselves. Still, there was always the possibility of a raiding party by the Dixie Rebs or the Pen 3 Corps. A couple of girls could get themselves slotted for getting that. Zemina and Roberta's flat was on level 3, up an evil-smelling concrete stairwell. Roberta lit the way up with a billy lamp, holding the heavy vulcanized rubber cylinder above her head, ready to use it as a club if she had to. "I saw Zach," said Roberta halfway up the stairs, "doing it to some monkey in the Pay High Park." Zemina said nothing and kept going. Roberta didn't like Zach, didn't like him for proving her wrong. Roberta told the future for pin money, spreading a pack of cards on a scarf of Akutsi silk. Regular cards, not tarot. She had a special pack that came from an extinct casino in Las Vegas, each card neatly punched through the centre. Roberta said they did that when you won big, to kill the luck and to stop you marking the cards. Once, when Zemina was stoned, she had a vision of a cowboy standing on a high desert plateau, shooting the cards as they tumbled through the air. She knew they did it with a hole punch, but sometimes, when she was on the edge of waking, the cowboy would walk into her dreams on booted feet, lucite and snakeskin burning in a desert sunrise. Patterns, Roberta said. Everything was in the patterns, the relationships between one card and those around it, like the patterns contained within neural networks, the variegated webs that made up the brain. Roberta had spread the cards for Zach one day and told him straight out that he would die young in the stop. But Zach had walked away from the program, from Roberta's sharp little synopsis of life and death in the ghetto, and Roberta had never forgiven him for it. Then you want to know about it? Zemina didn't, but she knew Roberta would tell her anyway. There, in the grotty stairwell, where the cold moisture slips down the puff concrete walls that are etched with graffiti, about how there she was, trading favours for money in the Constitution Day crowds in Beijing, finishing off a trick in Peihai Park, when she saw Zach with some free squeeze. The slow, urgent motion of their bodies drained of colour by the moonlight. "Give me a break," said Zemina. "I'm just getting to the good bit," said Roberta. A flash of silver amongst the discarded clothes. Roberta creeping over, timing her movement with the hoarse cries of the woman, reaching out a hand to snatch at the bright metal tube. "What are you going to do with it?" asked Zemina. Money pens being a difficult prospect at the best of times. "She's bound to report it stolen." "Got to be worth something, though," said Roberta, as they finished the last of the stairs. She was waiting for them outside their flat, a bundle of rags just like any other cat food monster that ever died on a cold landing in the projects. Later, Zemina would ask herself how far you could twist the patterns of life to create a coincidence like that. Roberta would have put it down to accumulated karma, just another way in which the fates conspire to fuck you up. But by then, Roberta was already dead. "Hey, you," said Roberta. "Go die on your own porch." "Wait up," said Zemina. "It moved." "So what?" Zemina squatted by the bundle. It was a woman in a ripped-up jumpsuit. The skin through the rents in the material was coated in a dried layer of blue paint. Zemina sniffed the air cautiously, expecting the usual cocktail of sweat, feces, and cheap protein. "Let's take her inside." "Are you crazy?" said Roberta. "It'll stink the place out." "She don't smell of nothing," said Zemina. But it wasn't true. The woman smelt of dry dust and snakeskin boots. She smelt of the high plateau of the cowboy's desert. "Open the door." Roberta unlocked the door, but didn't help Zemina drag the woman in. As her shoulders crossed the threshold, the dried blue paint on the woman's face gently cracked, and she smiled. "I have come to save you all," she murmured. "A shizzy," said Roberta. "That's all we need." STS Central, Olympus Mons. They left old Sam back at the office, jacked into Hitachi with strict instructions to flatten his alpha waves if he even threatened to wake up. Banked and tranked, as Dogface put it. Lambada had wanted old Sam put on ice for the duration, but it wasn't much of an argument. What they'd seen in Actura Station was too fresh in their minds, and there was still no media response to events so far. Even the bad news show had shifted smoothly to a standard security raid in some Melbourne township. Local cops banging down doors, wrist-wired suspects lying face down in the dirt. It could have been edited together out of archive footage. Only the high-clearance data links gave it away. VIP shuttles and cop wagons racing down feeders and freight lines, screaming priority signalling overrides that fouled up the network from Thessis to Mogadishu. Sirens echoing down the long non-tunnels of the system, all of them converging on Reykjavik, coagulants on their way to stem the hemorrhage in the body politic. So the floozies rode the big elevator up to Central in silence until halfway up, when Dogface couldn't stand it any longer, and asked just how long it took to put together an interim government. Nobody knew. When they got to Central, Ming looked almost grateful to see Dogface, and anyone glad to see Dogface, thought Blondie, is in big trouble. They sat around the big analysis tank in the conference room. Credit Card was scaling down the reconstruction of the Stunnel initiation. A 20-digit timecode flicked past microseconds in the left-hand corner. "There," said Ming, and the simulation froze. Inside the tank was a simplified three-dimensional representation of flow channels around Arcturus Station. The Stunnel carrier wave was a silver thread entered from the top left-hand corner and belled out into a disk at the station gateway. The station itself was a transparent block in the shadow grey that was used to depict solid installations. A spiderweb of power conduits surrounded the gateway in shades of blue. The lighter the shade, the higher the loading. At the point of initiation, the web was the colour of summer lightning. Dogface unfolded his arms and stuck his finger into the jack at the base of the tank. The timecode flickered back a couple of digits and then forward again. Blondie had no idea what they were looking at. "Enhance that," said Dogface. Credit Card thought about it, and the silver line of the Stunnel thickened suddenly. Arcturus Station was pushed out of the tank by the change of scale. Closer in, the Stunnel looked like tube made of open-weave carpet. Silver threads weaving in and out representing the shifting multi-frequencies of the carrier wave. "Jesus," said Lambarda softly. There was a distinct bulge in the silver tube. When Credit Card rewound the reconstruction, the bulge shot backwards towards Arcturus. Credit Card froze the image and scaled up, showing the silver weave in finer detail. He stopped when the bulge filled most of the tank. "It's like something inside is pushing out the walls," said Blondie. Ming looked at Dogface, who shrugged back. "Do a cutaway," she said. A geometric section of the bulge vanished, leaving a neat cross-section. The core was a black sphere under the silver threads. "Something inside pushing out the walls," said Dogface, looking at Blondie. "What is it?" asked Blondie. "Black signifies no available data," said Credit Card. "This is just a representation," said Ming. "You can't have a real object distorting a carrier wave like that." "You can't get a real object through a carrier wave at all," said Lambarda. "It's not a real object," said Credit Card. "It's got to be some kind of harmonics effect within the pattern of the carrier wave itself." "Something came out of the Stunnel gateway," said Blondie. "Doesn't mean it was real," said Credit Card. "Not really real, anyway." "Tell that to the President," said Dogface. "I've never seen this kind of effect on a carrier wave before," said Lambarda. "No one ever initiated a tunnel over interstellar distances before," said Credit Card. "Who knows what kind of effect you're going to get over 40 light-years?" "Distance isn't relevant," said Lambarda. "The tunnels are trans-bloody-dimensional. All that matters is harmonizing the gravitic geometry at either end." "What if the physical distance created a distortion in the carrier wave and you got a gravitic anomaly?" said Credit Card. "There's a standard function curve for calculating that," said Lambarda. "I was with Verhoeven when he did the fine-tuning. We took account of that." "Verhoeven is now a sticky patch of disassociated chemicals, along with half the establishment," said Dogface. "Let's run the simulation at 1/10 speed and see what happens." "You want to stay with the anomaly?" asked Credit Card. "What do you think?" said Dogface. The simulation ran forward. The woven strands of the Stunnel carrier wave rippled over the curve of the bulge. It looked to Blondie like a bowling ball falling down a stocking leg. "Gravitic anomaly, my arse," muttered Lambarda. "It's accelerating," said Credit Card. "Getting up a good head of steam," said Dogface. "Arcturus Station coming up," said Credit Card. "Slow it down," said Ming. In slow motion, the bulge hit the bell end of the Stunnel gateway. The carrier wave seemed to push the bulge out into the station, but whatever caused it wasn't showing up in the real world. "That's when the telemetry and video links went down," said Ming. If you look at the way the carrier wave snaps back into place, notice the power surges running up the main cables, causing a shutdown in the subsidiary circuits, said Credit Card. Whatever caused the anomaly must dissipate directly into the station. No one's planning to reinitiate the tunnel in the near future, are they? Asked Lambada. Well, not that I know of, said Ming. That's a relief. What's wrong with you? Dogface asked Blondie. Didn't you see it? Said Blondie. It went out the other side of the station. The others looked at him. They hadn't got it yet. It's got into the system. The stop. Benny sat upright in the kitchen bed and turned the book over in her hands. Her skin felt raw against the rough linen of the nightdress. You've got good skin, said the skinny girl with outsized breasts as Benny scrubbed off the remains of the blue stuff. Underneath, her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her tan gone, except where it had been covered by the remains of her jumpsuit. It looked weird in the bathroom mirror. One arm brown, the other pale and unblemished, brown legs above the knee. It looked constructed, as if Benny had been patched up with random spare parts. Zemina had lent her the nightdress and given her the book. Pale vellum bound in leather, handwriting on about half the pages. The book was important, Benny was sure of that, but the writing, while in Roman script, was impossible to decipher. Not a language that she knew. I was carrying this? She asked Zemina. It was in your pocket. Zemina was using a wooden spoon to shovel brown stuff from a white cardboard container into a cast iron wok. The container had a stylized picture of a cow printed on the sides. The brown stuff sizzled as it hit hot metal. The other girl, the thin-faced one, leaned against the kitchen door. Roberta, her name was. We figured you were a maintenance engineer, she said. But you're not, are you? No, I'm a traveller. Zemina pulled out a green glass bottle from the top cabinet and uncorked it. Benny caught a whiff of strong spice, garlic, and coriander. She thought you were a cat food monster, said Zemina as she stirred in the sauce. Got any money? Said Roberta. Benny could smell it, behind the grease stink of the frying meat, behind the spice and cheap perfume. It was a patina of grime, laid down over years on the surfaces of the apartment and the pinched faces of these young girls, giving their eyes a brittle brightness. A hard smell, atomized out of the walls and floors, the smell of despair and broken dreams. Benny knew it well from cheap hostels and ratty billets on hundreds of worlds, from relocation camps and shanty towns, poor man's funk, flop sweat, the smell of poverty. Zemina pulled another cardboard container from the cabinet. This one had an onion printed on it. Cheap food. Both girls had pinprick sores at the corner of their mouths, borderline malnutrition, vitamin deficiency. Poverty was a slow way to die. No, said Benny, but I've got skills. Roberta grinned. Know anything about money pens? Circle line. The doctor was lighter than he looked, lighter than he should have been given his strength. Even so, Kadiatu was glad when she could dump him in a seat on the next Circle Line train out of Asinai. The doctor lolled back in the seat, opened his mouth as if to speak, and then shut it again. At least he had stopped singing. A concession stand whirred down the central aisle, selling cups of hot Turkish. Another damn fine cup of coffee was painted along its side. Kadiatu bought one with the temporary money pen Francine had given her. It was black and sweet and helped clear her head. She looked over at the doctor. His arms and ankles were crossed, the red-handled umbrella tucked protectively under one elbow, his hat slipped down to cover his eyes. He looked content, like a man getting his first proper rest for years. He was not what Kadiatu had expected at all. When she was young, Kadiatu had lived with her mother and father on the outskirts of Makane in a big mud-brick bungalow. Her parents had kept some altered goats and chickens in the compound to supplement their service pensions. Most of the time, father would sit out on the veranda, thinking and watching the world go by. People would pass by on their way to the river. Sometimes they'd stop for a gossip or to trade. Sometimes other people would come, walking up the dusty track from the station, men and women with lined faces and haunted eyes. Often they would stay up all night talking to father, conversations full of pain and longing. One day Francine came, landing her VTOL right in the middle of the road, bringing the children running out of school. In the rainy season, when the rain rattled off the corrugated iron roof, Kadiatu would sit with her father and listen to his stories. Many of them were about the first grandfather and his adventures with the Shirl, back in the old days when the family lived on an island in the north. The Shirl was like Mr. Spider, facing danger with guile and cunning, always outsmarting his enemies. When Kadiatu grew up, she wanted to be like the Shirl, but her father said no. Only the Shirl was like the Shirl. So Kadiatu grew up with stories about the metal giants, the wicked machines, and the spiders that could think. Later, in the vast history archive under Stone Mountain by the Cayley Plains on Luna, she had learned that every last story was true. In the language of her parents, Shirl was the word for medicine man, for magician, for doctor. There was a disturbance at the end of the carriage. A man was shouting something in a hoarse voice. A wave of unease swept down the length of the train. "What's happening?" called a woman opposite Kadiatu. A man lurched to his feet and started down the aisle towards them, naked distress on his face. "They've killed the president," he said. "Somebody blew up the president." The doctor muttered something in his sleep.